the man who owned the building. Morning light spilled through the glass walls of the corporate tower, turning the polished marble floor into something like a mirror. Employees hurried across the lobby with coffee cups and laptop bags, none of them aware they were about to witness a moment that would stay with them for years. In the center of the lobby stood a tired-looking single father in dusty work clothes, a worn backpack over one shoulder, and a lunchbox in his hand. He'd just come down from the 14th floor, where a ceiling panel had been leaking since the weekend. Moments later, the company's young CEO strode toward him with a folder tucked under her arm and cold determination on her face. Without asking a single question, she handed him a termination letter in front of everyone. The crowd braced for him to plead his case, to stammer an apology, to beg for a second chance the way people usually did. Instead, he smiled, calm, unshaken, and said quietly, "Before anyone celebrates, you might want to check who owns this building." The words landed like a held breath. A few people laughed nervously, assuming they'd misheard him. Others simply stopped where they stood, sensing that something in the room had shifted even if they couldn't say what. He folded the letter without another word and slipped it into his shirt pocket. His name was Everett Hale, a widower raising his 10-year-old daughter, Nora, on his own. Almost no one at the company knew the first thing about him. To them, he was just the maintenance man, the one who fixed the flickering lights, patched the leaking pipes, and always had a gentle word for whoever crossed his path in the hallway. He remembered birthdays he wasn't invited to celebrate. He knew which vending machine ate people's coins and quietly stopped charging anyone who complained about it. What none of them saw was the other half of his day, rushing across town every evening to collect Nora before her after-school program closed its doors, then coming home to cook dinner with whatever was left in the fridge. Life had been hard since his wife died 3 years earlier, after a long illness that ate through their savings one hospital bill at a time. Everett had sold off nearly everything they owned except the small house that still held their memories, her reading chair by the window, the height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the garden she used to keep. He never complained about any of it. Not once. Not even to the friends who tried to ask. Every morning before sunrise he made breakfast, did his best with Nora's hair even though the braids never came out quite right, packed her lunch with a note tucked inside, and reminded her that kindness mattered more than success ever would. Then he put on the same faded uniform and went to work, earning quiet respect from the guards and janitors and receptionists who saw, every single day, exactly how hard he worked, while most of the executives upstairs never bothered to learn his name. The company's new CEO, Vanessa Whitmore, had taken over recently after her father stepped down for health reasons. She was sharp, driven, and utterly convinced that sentiment had no place in leadership. She had built her reputation on efficiency reports and quarterly targets, and within weeks of taking the corner office, she'd launched a round of aggressive cost-cutting across every department. The building learned to dread her emails, since another wave of layoffs usually followed close behind. One morning, walking through the lobby with a group of executives trailing behind her, she spotted Everett sitting on an overturned crate, catching his breath after hauling equipment up several flights of stairs because the freight elevator was down for maintenance. She didn't ask what he'd been doing. She didn't ask how long he'd been carrying that ladder, or why his shirt was soaked through. She simply assumed the worst, and her irritation spilled out in front of the room. She announced, loudly enough for everyone near the elevator bank to hear, that there was no place in her company for people without discipline, and told the trailing HR representative to let him go on the spot, effective immediately. No one spoke up. Fear is good at keeping people quiet, and everyone in that lobby had rent to pay and families of their own. Everett took the letter without anger, without any trace of humiliation on his face, just the steadiness of a man who knew something the room didn't. Before he turned to walk away, he made his quiet suggestion about the building's ownership, and then he simply stood there, waiting, as if he already knew how the next few minutes would unfold. Vanessa laughed it off, sure it was nothing more than a last, desperate bid to save face from a man who'd just lost his job. But one of the legal advisors standing near the back of the group went pale and pulled up the property records on his tablet, his thumb moving faster than it needed to. His hands weren't steady as he read what came up on the screen. The building didn't belong to the corporation. It belonged to Hale Property Holdings, and the name on every filing, every lease agreement, every legal document going back a decade was Everett Hale. The silence that followed was almost physical. Somewhere behind her, someone's phone buzzed and nobody dared to check it. Years before, Everett and his wife had built a successful construction company together, investing carefully rather than living large, saving instead of spending on the things other people their age were buying. Purchasing commercial real estate, including the very building Vanessa's company now leased 3 full floors of, had been one of their smarter calls, made over a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon when Nora was still a baby. After his wife died, his ambition went with her. He stepped back from running things, handed the portfolio to a team of professional managers he trusted, and went looking for a simpler life, where he could focus on raising Nora without a boardroom pulling him away from her recitals and her scraped knees. Quietly, without telling anyone who he was, he took a maintenance job in one of his own buildings, partly to stay grounded, partly to see, firsthand, and without anyone performing for him, how the people at the bottom of an organization chart were actually treated when nobody important was watching. He'd always suspected that money changes people. He wanted to prove, if only to himself, that it didn't have to change him. Vanessa just stared, unable to fully process what she was hearing. She'd spent weeks giving speeches about leadership and vision without ever learning a single story from the people working under her roof, without knowing which of them had sick parents or new babies, or, apparently, deeds to the building she worked in. Everett didn't gloat and didn't say another word about any of it. He simply wished the room a peaceful day, picked up his backpack and lunchbox, and left to go pick up Nora from school, exactly as he did every other afternoon. Somehow that quiet, unhurried exit stung more than any argument could have. By evening, the story had moved through the whole company, floor by floor, the way these things do. People who'd stood silently by kept replaying it in their heads on the train home, embarrassed they hadn't said anything while a good man lost his job for nothing more than catching his breath. They remembered all the small things now, turning them over like they were seeing them for the first time. Everett carrying boxes without being asked, fixing a broken desk without complaint, buying coffee for someone who'd clearly had a rough morning, staying late to help a night shift cleaner move a jammed cart. Vanessa didn't sleep much that night. She sat in her apartment with the lights off, staring at nothing in particular. For the first time since taking the job, she found herself wondering whether leadership built on fear could ever earn anything real, or whether she'd simply been mistaking obedience for respect the whole time. The next afternoon, she asked her assistant to reach out and request a meeting with him. He showed up in his work clothes, not a suit, and sat across from her the way he might have sat across from anyone. She'd half expected him to be triumphant, to make her sit with her own mistake for a while. Instead, she got kindness. He told her ownership had never really mattered to him. Titles come and go, money comes and goes, and the real measure of a leader shows up in the smallest, least noticed moments, especially in how they treat people who have nothing to offer them in return. He'd kept his identity hidden, he admitted, because he wanted to know whether people would be treated with dignity for who they were, not for what they had or what they could do for someone else's career. Every word hit harder than any criticism could have. Vanessa realized she'd inherited something extraordinary from her father and had quietly forgotten the one lesson he'd actually tried to teach her before he retired. That everyone in that building was carrying something you couldn't see from the executive floor. The next morning, instead of another round of firings, she gathered the entire staff in the same lobby where Everett had been let go. In front of everyone, the guards, the receptionists, the junior analysts, the people who cleaned the floors at night, she apologized. Not because of who owned the building, she said, her voice steadier than she expected, but because she'd failed as a leader. She admitted she'd judged a man without knowing anything about him and thanked him, publicly, for the lesson. The applause went on for minutes. More than a few people were wiping their eyes, including a security guard who'd worked there for 11 years and had never once seen an executive apologize for anything. Everett accepted the apology graciously and asked for exactly one thing in return: not a promotion, not a title, not a seat on the board. He asked for a company program to support single parents and employees caring for sick family members. No one, he said, should ever have to choose between a paycheck and taking care of the people they love. Vanessa approved it that same week. Within months, the company had rolled out flexible scheduling, childcare support, emergency family leave, and scholarships for employees' kids. Productivity climbed. So did loyalty. People stopped showing up just for the paycheck. They started showing up because they felt, for the first time in a long time, like they actually mattered to the place they worked. Nora came by the office often after school now, dropping her backpack by the front desk while she waited for her father to finish up. Instead of the anxious, hurried faces she used to notice on her way through the lobby, she found people who actually smiled at each other in the hallways, who stopped to ask how her day had been. Watching her father fix a light fixture one afternoon, balanced carefully on a stepladder, she asked why he still bothered, since he owned the whole building anyway and could have hired someone else to do it. He just smiled and climbed down to sit beside her. Dignity was never about the size of a paycheck, he told her. Honest work reminded him of who he really was, underneath everything else, and every fixed light, every repaired door, every small kindness mattered, because the people on the other end of them mattered. Years later, people who'd been there still talked about that day, not as the day a CEO fired the wrong man, but as the day the company learned that compassion was worth more than any policy written into the employee handbook. Sometimes, after all, the richest person in the room isn't the one with the biggest office. It's the one with the biggest heart.